What's it really like being a cop? What's it really like being a cop in New York City? Let's find out on Equal Matters. The intro created by my friend Cal, the guitar hero. He's so good, currently he's on tour with an artist named Anise around the country. Hi, I'm Rob Hunter, and I've always been curious. Curious about how we live, curious about our stories and what our experiences are. That's what Equal Matters is all about. Those experiences and stories and lessons, those things that we've learned and how they shaped us. Today, you're going to meet a friend who is more than a friend, he's family. His name is Rob Coppola. Rob and I, believe it or not, met on a cruise and became friends really quickly. At the time, Rob was a New York City police officer. He was on a cruise with two of his friends, also both cops with New York's finest. It was 11 months after September 11th. 11 months after I had spent deep diving into terrorism and learning about Al-Qaeda as part of my career in talk radio. So at first, Rob and I bonded like you'd expect anyone else to. We bonded over sports. I was born in the Boston area. He was born in New York, so we had that Boston-New York rivalry thing. But weirdly, we got along. We started hanging out on that cruise, and while we were out at sea over buckets of beer, the sports stories started to become more into cop stories. And some cop stories are flat out hilarious. And you're going to hear some of those today as we talk to New York Rob, as he's become known. He now lives out here in Phoenix, about 15 minutes up the street. Like I said, he's family. And over the years, he's been incredibly patient with me because I've asked him hundreds, if not thousands, of questions about being a cop, asking him to tell me some of the cop stories over and over and over again, and the stories about working with a partner all the time. You'll hear some of those stories today as well. Rob has been shot at. Rob has had a brick thrown at his head. Rob has had a bed frame thrown at him. One of his first assignments came right after a riot in New York. As a rookie cop, he was a beat cop. These stories are absolutely fascinating, and he agreed to sit down behind a microphone and answer some of those questions and tell some of those same stories. And I thought it was interesting because it gives you an insight and a perspective as to how a cop, in this case Rob, who believes in a very healthy balance in your rights versus law enforcement powers, how he approached being a cop, what he liked about being a cop, what he didn't like about being a cop. This is part of a long series of conversations I plan to have with Rob because he's had so many of these interesting experiences, including that Tuesday morning in September in 2001. I'm going to save that for the second conversation because that's a heavy one, even for him still 20-plus years later. And there's something else to keep in mind as we talk to Rob today. On average, each one of us experiences 3 traumatic events in our lifetime. A police officer averages about 200 just in terms of their service because they see things that we don't see in volume that we don't hear. They see death, violence, traffic accidents. But it's not all bad. There's friendships and partnerships. There's laughs. This is a complete picture of a career inside the New York City Police Department. A conversation I think that you'll enjoy. A conversation that I know you're going to learn a ton in. I know I did. And after all, that is what I find that helps me the most in life. Understanding by listening and broadening my perspective. So enjoy this perspective. My friend, retired police officer, Rob Coppola. Okay, Rob, you were a cop for 20 years. You've been retired for 12. In that time, from when you first started with the New York City Police Department, has your view of being a cop changed?
100%, yes.
And why is that?
I think basically you'd have to be out of your mind to take a police department job at this point in time.
Which is a whole other conversation I want to have at a different day because back in 1991 when you started in New York City, it looked very differently. And 2 weeks into your career at the NYPD, you had to respond to a riot, the Crown Heights riot, and it was pretty bad. A number of people died, a number of cops got injured. So you are a young 22 years old. You get called out to Crown Heights, Brooklyn, in the middle of this. What's going through your mind?
Well, most of the riots occurred in the summer of that year. I didn't get out of the academy until the fall. So we were there basically for mop-up duty, but there were still skirmishes that were going on. And they just needed like cops in every corner to make sure that there, wasn't another riot that was going to break out. But yeah, I was barely 22 years old. Other than playing hockey, I never had a fight in my life. And here I am thrown into this hellhole and, wet behind the ears. And what they teach you in the academy is never like the way it really is in life. I guess you can say that about any kind of training, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I was totally a fish out of water. And it was eye-opening. And it was scary.
I can imagine.
I mean, I've told you this story. I mean, we were there for a couple of weeks and someone threw a bed frame, an actual metal bed frame off a roof at us. And we would have like 4 or 5 cops standing on a corner, or you'd have 2 cops standing on the northeast corner and 2 cops standing on the southeast corner. And then of course, in a matter of an hour, all the cops are standing together like homeless people, just standing around a garbage can, keeping their hands warm. But yeah, we were all standing together on a corner, and someone threw a metal bed frame at us.
How close did it come to hitting you?
The bed frame wasn't close. The cinder block that was thrown at us missed me probably by a foot.
And that was from a roof as well.
That was also from a roof.
So there you are, 22 years old, what was it, a bed frame?
Like a metal bed frame.
Like a metal bed frame and a cinder block. Welcome to being a New York City police officer.
Yeah, pretty much.
Did you, in that moment, go, maybe I should change my mind? Can I get out of it?
I mean, we all knew that that's the way it is. I mean, New York City's been New York City for, 100 years, right? I mean, there's been riots in every major city forever. So, I mean, we knew what we were getting ourselves into. But yeah, I mean, it's when it happens, you're like, oh no.
Yeah, I know it's easy for me to laugh, but this is one of the reasons why I want to have this conversation with you, because I have very limited interactions with police officers, especially now. Most of mine have been from a media standpoint. And I remember going on a ride along in New Orleans with the NYPD. And what I saw in like 3 or 4 hours completely opened my mind up to what policing is like. I can't imagine seeing it like that on the street day after day and what that might do to you. So that's why I think it's important to have an understanding of what a police officer thinks about, goes through, whether or not they have to become a cop during a riot. So take me back to New York City. You were born and raised in New York City. So 1991, very violent, highest murders in the country. So the year you came on, there were 2,571 murders.
Insane.
So why did you want to become a cop in that environment in New York City?
Well, I mean, the crime rate was out of control probably from 88, the late 80s until that point. So they were hiring 2,000, 2,500 cops every 6 months, basically, because they just needed cops on the street. So I was working in Macy's selling women's shoes. And my best friends at the time, one of them worked in a pharmacy and hated it. Another one of my friends was a baggage handler on LaGuardia Airport, hated it. And I always say it was like a Seinfeld moment. The scene where George Costanza and Seinfeld are sitting at the diner and they're just disgusted with their lives, with their work and dating, and they just look at each other and like, what are we doing with our lives? Like, what are we going to be doing like 10 years from now? And that's exactly what it was with us. The three of us were in a diner, and it was like 10 o'clock at night, and we had all gotten off work, and we were sitting and like, what are we going to do? Like, we're all like 20 years old, and none of us wanted to do what we were doing. And my friend Frank said, you're hiring cops like crazy. Why don't we do that? You work 20 years, you get a pension. You're not going to be a millionaire, but you'll make some money and you can retire. And after 20 years, we'll get a pension. And, and 2 of us took the job. 1 of us did not. And, that's what we did. None of us were destined to be cops. We just needed a job.
Didn't want to sell women's shoes anymore.
Yeah, we just needed a job that was a steady job, a steady paycheck. I mean,
So what is that like? So you decide, okay, I'm going to become a cop. Now I assume you got to go tell your parents. You got to make that decision. So, people always have this idea of cop. It's a dangerous job. there's a lot of, I don't want to say baggage, but you go through a lot.
Right.
So I can imagine some people's natural response, like, you sure you want to do that? Did you experience that?
Yeah, my parents weren't happy.
Yeah.
My parents weren't happy at all. My mom's always been more of a passionate person than my dad. So my mom was more vocal in her, I guess, sadness. My dad was, my dad's always had my back. So my dad he was proud of me, like, that I wanted to do it. But I think they were both nervous about it. And then, like, my friends, my friends were like us. Like, all my friends had these meaningless jobs that you could never make anything out of. So I think all my friends were kind of like, yeah, do it. That's cool. But yeah, my parents were not happy at all.
But you go about and you do it anyways.
Yeah.
So was there a point when you're going through the application process, because I don't know, you have to tell me how it works, where you knew, okay, I can do my 20 years? Because that's a good, reasonable goal. Like, all right, I can manage being a police officer 20 years. Did you kind of have that in mind as you're starting out, as in that's kind of the goal, or was it not even really a thought because you were new and you're just trying to get going?
Well, the way the process works, the hiring process is you take your test, right? And then after you take your test, you have to wait. So there were people that were waiting 3 years.
Oh, wow.
To become cops for whatever reason, because of their background checks or other jobs that they had, or they couldn't, the investigators could not, had too much information to investigate these people. Me, at that point, I only had one real job in my life. I had come right out of college. So I basically took the test and I was hired less than a year later, which is kind of unheard of. Usually people are on a list for 2 years before they get hired. But when I took the job, I'm like, I might stay 20 years. Like, after 20 years, why not? If I have a nice job, or I'm enjoying myself, or, things are good. I wasn't so hell-bent on leaving after 20 years when I first started.
Okay.
But, things happen.
Yes. So, the other part that is interesting to me, too, is the academy. Because that's where they train you to be a police officer. How long is the academy? What was it like going into the academy?
Well, if you watch any military movie, or any movie that has basic training in the military, like movies like Full Metal Jacket, it's not that intense. Like, the NYPD is a quote unquote paramilitary organization, so it's kind of the same. So you go into a class. My class had, my graduating class had, I think, 60 different classes. Each class, we had over 2,000 cops that graduated. So you do everything with these people. So you have a class of 35 or 40 or whatever it was, and you're with them for 6 months straight, and you do everything together. You go to the shooting range together. You go to the driving range. You go to the morgue. You go everywhere you go with these people. So it's just like you see in these military movies, where it's just people just become friends and they get close and you protect each other, and you have people you don't like and they're outcast. Like, nothing like Full Metal Jacket where people go crazy, but that's the way it is.
Right? It's just like the natural way of humans to be.
Right. And then like, like we used to play softball with other teams or do other classes. And there was definitely rivalries because we were together. So we hated whoever we played against, or it was just like being on a team, like sports team, It was probably one of the best things about being in the police department.
So explain that. What stands out to you as you think back about it? Now we're talking 30 years ago.
But just the closeness that you have with people. Just like you're spending every day with them. And like, it's different when you get out of the academy, because now you're put into a different squad and you're different people, and people are always moving and, taking days off or switching tours. But when you're in the police academy, you're not. You're just with the same people every day. So you get you get close with these people, and
yeah,
it's just like being thrown in like a hamster cage with someone for 40 people for 60 days, for 6 months. That's what it's like, and you have no other choice but to get close with people. And we did, and it was great. I kind of lost track with a lot of them, which is sad, but I still speak to people 30 years later. So,
Well, it's kind of like it's like your extended high school graduating class,
Right.
but it's the job, right? And that's why it's called. All right, I'm on the job now. I'm a police officer. So going back through the academy, what was fun about it outside of the camaraderie? Is it like a 9 to 5 thing, 5 days a week, or is it they move you around a little bit? In what do they teach you in the academy?
Well,
Without giving away all the NYPD
no,
secrets.
well, yes, there's no secrets, believe me. Well, the chores were you would do 8 to 4s in the morning, and then the next week you do 4 to 12s at night, 4 p.m. to 11:30 p.m., and it just rotated like that. And the fun parts were the things that we did outside of the academy. I mean, inside the academy was cool. Like, when you go through all the physical stuff, running and exercises and the fighting, and the whatever. But whenever we went outside, it was when it was the best. The shooting, whenever we used to go shooting, it used to be fun. The best was probably the driving. The driving school that we went to, like, the practice the driving skills and all that stuff. It was most likely the most fun we had because people just don't know how to drive. And, it's not like you're going to take a road test when you're training in the NYPD driving.
You got your official New York City police officer license.
Yeah, so it's like, so they make you drive the car like 60 miles an hour down this one lane, and there's a chute that you have to go to, like a fork in the road. And you don't know if you're going left or right because they want to teach you how to drive, in like on streets or whatever, where you have to go around cars. And the instructor's with you in the car, and you have to get the car up to 60 miles an hour. And they make you get so close to that fork in the road before they tell you what side to go on, and the last second they'll scream left or right. And if you anticipate one way and then they make you go the other way, the crashes are outrageous and they're glorious because there's a million cones out on the road because their lanes are, divided by cones. And there's those big ass construction cones. And if someone would wipe out, you just see cones flying everywhere. It was the most hysterical thing.
Did you hit any cones?
Yeah, I'm sure I did.
Is it expected that you're going to hit cones the first time?
Yeah,
you're going to take like a cop sedan, right, and drive it faster than you can drive it on a Brooklyn street.
Right. So I mean, you're going to crash because their goal is to make you crash. Like their goal is to make you fail, so that when you actually have to do it, you'll be ready for it, right?
Don't.
Just like when you go like the shooting. So we'd go to the shooting range and practice that, but then we'd go to these scenarios, like these scenarios that they have now, where you go in front of a screen and there's a bad guy and you're supposed to not shoot not shoot the good guy, but you're supposed to shoot the bad guy. And in every scenario that they put you in, someone gets shot. The cop always gets shot every time. Like, it's no matter what you do. You can be like the greatest cop ever. Someone gets shot because it's just ridiculous because they just want to make sure that you follow every single thing and look for every single scenario that might hurt you.
How do they grade you in the academy? So is it, like the military movies where you have the drill sergeant and the drill sergeant's in charge of the drills and
not so much. Like, we would have every company, every class is called a company. So like 60 classes in the academy have 35, 40 guys in it, people in it. They assign a sergeant to each class. Now, that sergeant is someone that's in your class. It's not someone that works for the academy. It's someone that's going through the academy with you, but it's someone who has military experience or who was a cop somewhere else. So they have that experience of dealing with the military.
They've done an academy somewhere.
So my company sergeant was in the military, and he was a company sergeant, and he was the biggest goofball. Like, we never understood how he was in the military. But a sad story about him was that he got out of the police academy, was a cop for 3 or 4 years. He rolled over to the fire department, and he died at 9/11. So Pete Brennan we used to call him Pistol Pete because he was a terrible shot.
Maybe that's why I went to the fire department.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm going to go over here.
But yeah, so there's no actual drill sergeant. But, all the instructors, try to be a drill sergeant.
Yeah.
But they're all cops. You know what I mean? They just try to be hard asses.
So you're going through the academy, you're having a good time. What was it like back then? What did you think about what you were getting into when you graduated. What were you thinking of being a cop was going to be like? New York Rob will answer that question in just a moment. Hi, I'm Rob Hunter. I'm the host of Equal Matters. And I want to talk about you for a second. Are you where you want to be? Are you bored? Do you feel unchallenged? You're thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, is this it? Does it sometimes feel like life is passing you by? I can relate because I faced that very moment myself a few years ago, and I decided to take action. And I decided to take action by investing in myself and investing in skills. I want to invite you to invest in yourself because not only am I the host of Equal Matters, I am a communications and performance coach. How this can help you is get you unstuck, to get you where you want to go. Because I think there's always that point in life where you get to a point in the road and there's an easy path, but it seems boring and well worn out. And then there's this other path that looks daunting, and that's when self-doubt comes up. So my program, Master Your Message, which my coaching is built around, has answers to all of that because it starts with how you communicate with yourself. So we go through that, and we get you communicating with yourself in the right way because that's what helps you shake things loose. That's what helps you renew your energy, your spirit, to be able to take on the task that you want, to be able to go into the direction that you want. So let's schedule a 20-minute call to find out if coaching is right for you and how it can help you. The easiest way to do so is go to paintedporchstrategies.com/Rob. paintedporchstrategies.com/Rob. There's a one-on-one coaching button. Click on that, and you can schedule that call. It's 20 minutes. It's absolutely free. This is about you. This is about chasing after what you want and achieving your goals, and how communication and performance coaching will help you get there. paintedporchstrategies.com/Rob. Go now, or check the show notes and click that link right there. Now, back to New York Rob. So you're going through the academy, you're having a good time. What was it like back then? What did you think about what you were getting into when you graduated? What were you thinking of being a cop was going to be like?
While you go through the academy, you don't really have time to think about that because there's just so much studying involved, and you're always exhausted. And driving into Manhattan every day and driving home, you're talking like 12-hour days, 13-hour days, and you just wanted to sleep, And while we were going through the academy, the riots were going on in Brooklyn, and we kind of knew what we were getting ourselves into, but you really don't have time to think about that. It's just so much studying involved, and my goal personally was the top 5% of every academy class gets like a braid that they put on their uniform when they graduate. And I'm like, I'm going to make sure I get that.
Nice.
That was my goal. Like, I just didn't want to pass. Like, I wanted to be in the top 5%. Just, that's what I wanted.
Did you do it?
I did.
So how did you do it? So how do they rate you? Because obviously, if you're driving, the instructor's in the car with you. They're going to train you for however long the driving portion is. Probably like, oh, Rob did really well. And then you go to the shooting range. I imagine the more accurate you are, the better you are. But I imagine there's tests, too, because you got to learn how to arrest people, the laws.
Right.
And that's what they teach you in part, right, at the academy?
Yeah, so you have law classes, you have sociology classes, you have, I think there's five different classes in total. And, you took tests like you would in a normal school, and, you had to, just like grading in high school or college, if you 65 is failing and 95 is an A or whatever, A+, whatever. The weight didn't carry so much as far as the shooting and driving went. Like, if you failed, you weren't getting out of the academy until you passed. But if you passed with the 67, they didn't care. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, right. Here's our point of no return. Yeah. This number. If you don't get that.
Yeah. So the physical part of the academy wasn't as tough as the actual schooling. So like the grading was just like I said, grading was just like anywhere else, and you had to pass.
Now, they're got to jump ahead a little bit. Is there like continuing education because laws change all the time? So do you have to have like new training as you're becoming a cop? So it's just like, all right, whatever you learned in the academy about the law, how it's applied, go apply it on the job and learn as you go.
Right. Yeah. And then once you're out of the academy, if things change, then you learn on the fly, You don't go back for any kind of – the only training you ever go back for is shooting. That's it.
And is that a requirement? Had to go in annually every 2 years?
You had to go twice a year.
Twice a year.
Twice a year, yeah. So my biggest beef was and still is like, you can get out of the academy and weigh 170 pounds and 5 years later weigh 240 pounds and no one cares. Like that used to drive me nuts. Like the physical part of it was just no one cared about it.
Which is so interesting because a big part, you're on your feet a lot.
Yep.
You're chasing bad guys a lot. You have to interact with people. So you got to be like at your best and ready for anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, you always see that like in the movie. You see like, oh, the big cop who's struggling to chase the criminal. But like if you were the criminal and you saw, they'd be like, I have a chance. So I get it.
Of course.
But it is super interesting, right? How that works. So tell me about some of the people you linked up with at the academy. So it's 1991, New York City, 2,000 people coming to be cops in the New York City Police Department. You're in your little section. Who are you linking up with?
Well, again, like you're in a class with the same group of people and you just gravitate to people that are like you or, are friendly, don't seem like they're crazy. And it's just like any setting of, any kind of work setting, right? Like you go to work with 30 people, like you know the people that seem like, all right, I don't want to talk to that guy because he's out of his mind, But yeah, I became really close with 3 or 4 different people that I stayed in contact with for a long time.
So how important is friendship in a police department?
I think it's really important. I mean, because you get to lean on each other. Because it's not easy. The physical part of it is not easy. Just the daily grind of going to the academy and dealing with that and getting screamed at all day long and then having to study and then drive and dealing with carpools and, it's just hard to do. So you meet people that you are like you and going through the same exact thing as you are. You get to lean on each other. And, we used to eat lunch every day together and, it's just like being in a big family, just like it is when you're actually out of the academy in a precinct. I mean, you work with the same people every day. You just become like a family.
Well, especially I've had the privilege of hanging out with you and several other cops. So it's because cops, you guys see so much a different part of humanity than most of us see. Not always good. Oftentimes not. It's not like you've always said this. It's not like, hey, I'm calling the cops so they come over and say hi. I made some apple pie. You guys want some? Nobody does that. There's always a problem. So you're constantly responding to problems. So as you're getting ready to graduate the academy, is it true that rookies get the worst shifts and the worst precincts?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, because, you have to imagine, like, all the bad, quote-unquote, bad precincts, which mostly bad means crime-ridden, needs the most cops, right? So if you're not gonna fill up a precinct where it has no crime with a bunch of cops, so they're gonna put all the new cops into a place where they need them, which is most likely somewhere that has a lot of crime. And yeah, once you go there, you're walking. Like, you're not seeing a car for a while. You're walking the beat.
Really?
Oh, yeah, you're walking a beat for a long time. The only way you're getting in a car is if, like, there's a bunch of arrests and there's cops that are doing something else and they need people.
Someone comes by and picks you up and says, let's go.
They need bodies to stick you in a car. Yeah.
Okay, so now you go out of the academy, and the New York City Police Department's broken up into 77 precincts.
Right.
So where did you get a pick as to where you were going? Did you have to like, hey, my top 3?
They give you a wish list, and I knew someone that was able to grant me, what I wanted. A friend of mine was able to get me where I wanted to go. So at the time, I spoke Italian. So, and I mean, I did it in high school. I spoke Italian in high school, and I kind of lost a little of it when I was in the academy. But I'm like, screw it, I'm going to use it to my advantage. Because most places where people speak Italian, I don't have to worry about getting shot unless it's some kind of mob thing. But if anyone knows the mob, they keep away from the cops. But anyway. So I knew someone, and my choices were Coney Island, where he worked. Mm-hmm. My first choice was actually Coney Island because he worked there, this guy that I knew. And then my second choice was in Bensonhurst, which was mostly Italian at the time. So he did not want me to work with him because he knew me personally, and he didn't want to, he figured he wanted me to learn, and I wouldn't be able to learn as well. So I went to the other precinct, but then I was only there for a couple weeks, but they sent me to Crown Heights to where the riots were. So
that's very interesting. So you're in, you get your assignment. So a couple weeks later, you're in the riot. You have a cinder block thrown at you. You have a bed frame thrown at you. And you're still not like, yeah, I'm going to quit. I've been to the academy, and this is as close as I am to getting a brick thrown at my face. You're like, nope, I'm in it. I knew this was coming. So riots happen, 91. So you're there for a couple of weeks doing your rookie cleanup duty. What did you learn from being in that riot, in around that atmosphere?
Well, I think what you learn is just how to deal with people, right? I mean, I really wasn't in a situation like that really my whole life. I mean, I dealt with the public, but not like that. And
you dealt with women buying shoes at Macy's.
And certainly not in that, in that arena, and I think that it was good to learn things about people and how they interacted with the police. And, like every bad precinct or bad place or ghetto, whatever you want to call it, there's always good people there, right? So there's always people that want to help you. There's always people that are going to tell you, hey, listen, don't go here, don't go there. And because it's just the way it is. And then you get to learn from those people, like the neighborhood people who are in bad news. And then when you get to know those people, you got to be on your guard, and you have to make sure that you're always keeping yourself safe and look over your shoulder. And I think that people that don't do that and just go to like a clubhouse as soon as they get out of the academy, they don't learn.
So a clubhouse would be like a precinct where there's not a lot of crime.
Right. Where there's not a lot happening.
Yeah.
And I think it's good to go right out of the academy and go to some place like that, like I did. And I wasn't there very long, but I definitely learned a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And in places like that, too, you have so many cops that are very active and very aggressive and want to make the arrest and want to get these people off the street. So you're not out there alone. Like you're dealing with cops that have been doing this for years, and they're always going to tell you, we were walking on a street corner forever, but there's still a million cars driving by, and there's still plenty of guys coming by asking us if they need anything, or, don't go down there, these dudes are bad, or let us, keep an eye on them, and you just keep away. Like there's just plenty of guys out there willing to help and tell you what to do.
Which is cool, right? Because it brings up that idea that it is a fraternity, and it's designed like cops protect each other, right? Especially for newbies, for rookies. So what is it like walking the beat? Because you just walked for 8 hours a day or 6 hours a day?
Yeah, I mean, basically they'll they'll tell you, you have to walk between Bell Road and Greenway on 40th Street the whole day, and you can't go anywhere else. So you basically just walking back and forth the whole time because there's someone that's going to be between Bell and Union Hills, and so, every once in a while you run into each other and you start talking for 20 minutes, and then you can't do that for very long because someone comes by and you get in trouble. But, yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of taking pride in your beat and making sure nothing happens on it,
And was it designed by the NYPD as a deterrent?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's just omnipresence is what they call it, right? So you're just out there to make sure no one does anything stupid in front of you. They'll just do it around the corner where there's nobody else.
Well, then that's when I went on the ride along with the New Orleans Police Department. This is many years ago. It was after I had met you, though. So I'd become aware much more so about what it's like being a police officer. They did the same thing, but their beat was like 3 cars. And this was one of the worst crime-ridden neighborhoods in New Orleans that they took us to. So they would patrol 3 cars all the time, and that same idea was, since we're visible, it suppresses crime, or at least shifts it around, because crime in New Orleans was like crime in certain parts of New York, just awful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you actually were in the NYPD for a period of incredible crime decreases, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I just want to highlight in 1991, it was the second highest murders ever in the city of New York, only to be preceded by 1990. So you are coming into what is, at the time, New York City's filled with crack, problems, poverty. So when you're walking the beat, what are the types of things that you came across, in this environment in New York? Because you were in Bensonhurst, because it was Italian, was it a little bit different than, going back to Crown Heights and walking the beat?
Yeah. I mean, 100%. I mean, it's night and day. When you're walking in Crown Heights on a foot post, you're thinking that someone's just going to come up behind you and hit you over the head with a 2x4 just because you're wearing a uniform.
Mm-hmm.
when I'm walking the street in Bensonhurst, someone's kind of come up to me and give me a cannoli. You know what I mean? That's the difference.
This is the good cannoli from this bakery right here.
Yeah. I mean, that's the difference. People, when you work somewhere nice, people are happy to see you.
Mm-hmm.
When you work somewhere that's not nice, people are not so happy to see you.
I just read some numbers about the NYPD's approval rating, and these are current numbers, but they're way different, right, racially. So many white people that live in New York are like, yeah, fine, because they probably don't interact with cops a lot. Many Hispanic voters or whoever polled in this, same thing, was pretty high. And then when it comes to African Americans, it gets a little bit different, right? Because the history of policing and all these things, which ties into Crown Heights, which at least back then was a black neighborhood and a Jewish neighborhood. That's where the riots came from. That was it was a whole story about a car that ran through a red light and killed a kid. It was, awful, and the whole thing set off. So, you have all this going along. Were you aware of the whole picture? Like, did you watch the news? What was the chatter like from your other officers being a New York cop in this high crime, high crack era?
Well, the biggest thing for us was that the mayor at the time was just useless.
Mayor Dinkins at the time,
Dinkins
right?
was just useless.
Not a cop's mayor.
I mean, it's basically resorted to the way it is now with the mayor they have now. Adams is basically the same.
And he's a former cop, Eric Adams.
Yeah.
The current New York City mayor.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But that's another whole other story.
Yeah.
He wasn't really a cop. He was just a complainer. He was just a complainer with the uniform. But, yeah, I mean, crime was out of control. Dinkins, they weren't locking anyone up. There was like no initiative to deter crime. And there was no initiative to get the guns off the street. And there was no initiative to stop people from getting killed. So if you're a criminal and no one's stopping you and there's no tools in place to stop you, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
You're going to do what comes naturally, right? So just going through the academy, watching what was going on. And the mayor of New York actually said to the cops to sit back and do nothing for days. Let them vent, he said. Let the people vent. And they just destroyed that place.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they just looted everything and destroyed a whole city for 2 full days because the mayor just told the cops to do nothing.
Interesting, right? Decisions are important, especially when you're the front line of defense. So what is it like knowing that? So obviously cops are talking, that the mayor doesn't have your back. What are they? So I'm just guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, Rob. There's a level of tension of being a cop in certain places because you're just not quite sure. You're on edge more so than you would be like patrolling the neighborhood I live in.
Right, of course. And like the morale is low, obviously. And you know that if the mayor doesn't have your back, the top brass of the NYPD, they don't have your back either because they're all trying to kiss the mayor's ass. Right. So it's like, why are you're going to be out there and do what? You can't initiate things because no one's going to be behind you, right? So you have to sit back and just be reactionary rather than be proactive, right? And I think a lot of that is happening now. I mean, when we got out of the academy, we heard all kinds of things about how we were just letting them just run amok and we couldn't do anything. And it drove people crazy. I mean, that's
the whole reason you became a cop.
Right. I mean, listen, there's all these gung-ho cops that want to save the world and which is great. But when you're being told to not do that, I can't see how that you can like going to work every day,
Well, you got to be worried too, because if you did decide to take action, would it be looked at in the rear view mirror as the wrong action? I mean, we see a lot of that now too. There was less videotapes because they didn't have phones back then, which, again, I want to have another conversation with you about that, like the difference of being a cop in 91 to 2001 to 2011, when really the end of your career is only when really cell phone recording became prominent. So it's a whole different ballgame in and of itself. So back in 91, you're there, you're a rookie, you got your beat, what is your first, I guess I want to ask, what is your first arrest? So now you're out in the streets, you're walking around, and you're like, okay, you might have to arrest somebody now.
Well, okay. So when we went to Crown Heights to the riot location, we really didn't make any arrests. They didn't want us making arrests because they wanted us on the street. They
Again, presence, right?
Right. So like if I make an arrest now, I'm not on the street anymore, right? I'm in the station house processing arrests. So now there's one less person to try to deter crime. So we didn't really make a lot of arrests when we were there. When I went back to my original precinct, the guys that I work with, we had a pool on who would make the first arrest. And we used to gather in the precinct after roll call, and sergeant would come up and give us some kind of training for the day after all the other guys went out on patrol. And usually like it would take 30 to 45 minutes, and he would explain like what we were going to do that day, blah, blah, blah. So this one particular day, we decided that we're going to have a pool. I forgot how much it was, $20 a head. And there was 10 of us. And the first person that made the arrest would get the money. So the sergeant didn't want to come out with us. He was an old timer, had like 30,000 years on the job, was drunk half the time. And he's just let us go on our own. We all pile into the van. All of us pile into the van. And it couldn't have been later than 4:30 in the afternoon on a 3 p.m. shift. We get a call of a shoplifter in a drugstore, Genevieve's drugstore. I don't think there's any more in existence, but I wasn't driving. I don't remember who was driving, but we instantly started driving 100 miles an hour to get to this place, to get to this drugstore.
Rookie cops, you're eager. Yeah. You want that pool money.
The whole time that we were going to the store, we were all arguing on who was going to get the arrest.
So you're driving a van down a small Brooklyn street, I imagine. Sirens wailing. This episode of Equal Matters is brought to you by Master Your Message, my communication and performance program. Hi, I'm Rob Hunter, the host of Equal Matters. We'll get back to my boy, New York Rob, a retired New York City police officer, in just a moment. But I wonder, are you stuck? Are you bored? Are you unchallenged? Do you think that life is passing you by? Well, there's a reason that you think that way, and it's not what you think. Maybe you're blaming your boss or your job, but it's not that. It's the voice that's in your head. It's the voice that leads to fear, low confidence, and self-doubt that holds you back. The good news is Master Your Message is here to help so that you can feel confident, believe in yourself, have the ability to push through fear to achieve whatever it is that you want, and you will show up as your best every single day. I was in those shoes till I decided I needed to do something. I was at that fork in the road, and I was looking at this path, and I was like, that path, it's easy, but it doesn't seem fulfilling. So I took the hard path, and along the way, I created all these tools that manage my self-talk and my self-doubt, of which I was filled with, and I want to offer them to you in Master Your Message. For only $197, you get 8 hours of content, 8 modules. It's fun. It's all kinds of great activities for you to learn how to manage your internal voice and show you how this internal voice leads to the emotions you feel and how those feelings and thoughts impact how you show up every single day. So, in Master Your Message, you can go from self-doubt to confident. You can feel in control of your mind, your emotions, your actions, and your life. Additionally, Master Your Message will dig into how you broadcast, as I'm a 25-year broadcaster. You're going to learn how to nail your presentations. You're going to learn how to listen more intently to gather information. You're going to learn how to handle disputes effectively and how to use different communication styles based on what you need at that moment. What you say is your billboard. Broadcast wisely with Master Your Message. Master Your Message is designed to help you open the doors that you want and get a seat at the table, and your relationships will improve. Get started now. PaintedPorchStrategies.com/communication. PaintedPorchStrategies.com/communication, or find the link in the show notes. Now let's get you back to New York Rob here on Equal Matters. So you're driving a van down a small Brooklyn street, I imagine. Sirens wailing, going to get the shoplift.
Actually, it was 86th Street.
86th Street.
And if anyone knows anything about movies, the famous scene from Saturday Night Fever was filmed on 86th Street with John Travolta walking down the street and getting that slice of pizza. That's 86th Street. Anyway, that's the street we were on. So we were arguing about who was going to get the arrest. So when you go through the academy, you get a tax ID number, which is basically like an employee number. And the way the tax ID number is determined is what test you came off of when you got into the academy. And basically it's just determined on the test that you took to get the job and whatever. So I had the highest tax number because I was one of the last people to get hired from my class. So I initially was automatically out because I had the highest number because everyone else had a lower number than me. So technically they got the job before I did. And I'm like, no, that's not happening. So we all get there. We all rush into this drugstore and they all run for the security office, obviously, because that's where they're keeping the person, right, in the security office. Instead, I went to the manager of the store.
Be a little different.
Because that's technically your complainant, right? That's the person that's processed. That's the person that's charging the person with stealing, right? So I went right to the manager, and I spoke to the manager, and I ended up getting the arrest.
Aha!
I never got the money, by the way.
Why? There was a dispute?
Of course, because they were all annoyed that they didn't make the arrest, and probably because we were only making like $600 every other week, so, we didn't have any money. So
what did this person shoplift? Do you remember? I mean, it's a long time ago.
Yes, I remember her name because she was my first arrest. Her name was Gloria Burgess, and she stole 8 tubes of Preparation H.
8 tubes?
I don't know why. Huh. I'm sure I asked her. I probably didn't even really care why she was stealing it. I'm sure it was some kind of drug thing back then. Who knows? I never found out why. Or maybe I did. I just don't remember.
Okay. So first arrest is a shoplifter, Preparation H. So now you got kind of this monkey off your back. You're now an official cop. You've arrested somebody. Like, how did that feel? Was it like, oh, I like arresting people, or I really don't like arresting people?
Well, it was good until I got to the station house and had to do all the paperwork, because I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
So it actually worked out better for everybody else that you got the arrest because you had to do all the paperwork.
I didn't know what I was doing. No one was helping me, and trying to voucher the tubes of Preparation H, and everything was done
valued at $150 per tube.
Everything was done on typewriters, and it was the old school fingerprinting with the ink, and if they weren't cooperating and the prints came out like crap, you had to keep doing it. And of course, and if they're sweating and I'm sweating, it comes out like, I don't even know how many times I had to print her. Probably 12 times.
Just a day in the life of a New York City police officer.
So, I mean, it was a desk appearance ticket, which is called the DAT. So it was just a minor, it's just a shoplifting. She didn't have any priors that were going to send her to jail, so she basically gets released. She gets released from the station house if she clears. Like, if her name clears, she's not wanted for anything else. So that's basically what happened. It took me longer to process it than it did for her to get cleared and sent out, because I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
Yeah. So that's a lesson of paperwork. What is paperwork like? Because I sometimes see at my office police officers sitting in their cruisers, appearing to they're doing their paperwork. So you can do it in your car now a lot because you have a laptop, but back then you mentioned typewriters. Is it super strict because that's going to be like in court, the arrest document? So do you have to like get everything right and spell everything right?
Yeah, well, that rarely happens, but obviously if you don't fill it out right, that's a technicality, right? So you should be strict with it, and I always was with my paperwork.
Trust me, I've known him for 20 plus years. He's very strict with his paperwork.
My paperwork was flawless when I learned how to do it. But as time progressed, things got worse. There was more and more paperwork. Everything had to go on paper. There used to be things where you would be like, okay, whatever, like domestic disputes, that you never had to fill out a paperwork for domestic disputes.
Really?
Then somewhere down the line, probably 5-6 years later, you had to fill out basically a 4-page report for every single domestic call, no matter what it was. Even if it was a neighbor calling about 2 people that lived across the street who had no reason to call the police, but someone called the police on them, you had to get a 4-page report from these people. So granted, people weren't happy because they actually had to give their side of the stories on the report. Like, they had to actually fill out the report themselves.
Wow.
So, of course, jobs that took 10 minutes now took an hour and 20 minutes because you're sitting filling out paperwork on top of paperwork.
Well, that's kind of a resource issue because it's what, an 8-hour shift. So walk me through a shift. So there's obviously day parts. You mentioned a couple of them. There's like morning shift, there's night shift, and overnight shift. Do you start, like, do you get in the patrol car right at, say, 8 o'clock and go out in the streets? Or is it you check in at 8, you have like a roll call type, then you go out in the cars?
Yeah, you check in, come in, go to roll call, get your assignment for the day, sit there and BS with the cops for a few minutes. They always want us out like 5 minutes after roll call, but that never happens. Everyone's just hanging out outside the precinct talking about the game the night before or whatever, or going out the night before. So usually, especially on the 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shifts, the precinct would usually start holding 10, 12 calls because no one was out there doing anything. Because the guys that were coming in at 3:30 would stop working at 3:15.
Mm-hmm.
And we wouldn't make it out there sometimes until 3:40, 3:45. So you have like 30, 40 minutes of no one answering calls because everyone's just putzing around.
Well, if you make an arrest at 3:15, you're going to have to stay an extra hour and a half to do the paperwork, I assume. Yeah.
Right.
So I can see that, right? I've been out here 8 hours already. I've been talking to criminals all day. I think I'm good. How many on average? I know this is a ridiculous question in some ways, but as you're out in the streets, you're on the streets for how long?
8:35 was our tour. So you're basically out there minus your lunchtime, about 7 hours and 15 minutes.
All in the car. After you get, so I guess I'll ask this because I didn't connect the dot yet. So you do the walking beat for how long before you get into a patrol car?
It depends. It depends on how many bodies they have in the precinct and how many cars they have available, because there's never enough cars, right? So if there's not enough cars, you walk.
Okay.
So I mean, there were times when I'd be 8 years, I would be on the job and we'd only have like 3 working cars, and I'd be walking the street because there's not enough cars.
Huh.
Because they're out of service, flat tire, or someone does something stupid and there's not enough cars.
All right, guess I'm getting my walk and my step. This is before 10,000 steps was a big deal. I mean, if you were only keeping track back then, you'd have been good to go. So on an average 8-hour shift, how many calls would you respond to? And are you guys on the NYPD always paired up? Like you have a partner with you all the time?
Yeah, there's always been a partner, yeah. And the jobs vary on where you work and what time, right? So if I'm in a busy place, you can have 20 jobs a day.
Wow.
On like a day shift. Like even where I worked, where it wasn't so busy, you'd answer 15 calls a day. Easy. The 3 p.m. to midnight shifts are a little different, obviously, because it's not so busy. And the midnight shifts are literally a graveyard shift. Like nothing happens. If you're in a place where nothing happens, really, literally nothing happens during the midnight shifts. Like I still speak to guys on Facebook that worked midnight shift when I worked in the slower precinct, and they always thought they were super cops. These guys would sleep 3 hours of freaking night because there was nothing going on.
Yeah, like, all right, call me when there's a crime.
But when something happened, I mean, it's usually big. I mean, it was usually something big that happened, right? Because, criminals are
2
out.
2 a.m., 3 a.m. Mm-hmm.
But it's rare that it happened, and because nothing ever happened, they'd always go into other precincts because they were so bored. And they all think they're super cops to this day. They always thought they were like the greatest cops ever, the ones who worked the midnight shift. And granted, it's a tough shift to work. It's terrible.
Well, it's dark, especially I imagine in the winter in New York City. It's February. Right. It's 2 a.m. It's 3 degrees out.
Yeah, and I get it, but you're not killing yourself out there.
I've never heard that because we always hear the midnight shift is the worst because it's that.
Well, it depends on where you are, right? Like if I'm working in Crown Heights, the midnights are totally different, right? Mm-hmm. Because
more active.
People don't wake up till 2 p.m. sometimes. So, the joke that we used to say about the bad precincts is like 3 in the morning, you see babies walking around. Like,
It's like the Dave Chappelle joke.
Yeah, that's the greatest example of it. 3 a.m., there's a baby standing on the corner. What's up, baby? And it's like, because it's like, there's no time. It's like being in Vegas, right? You never know what time it is.
It's true. Time is a construct or whatever. Yeah. So that now you're a cop, you're out there, you're in the patrol cars, you made your first arrest. Big crime you're talking about. So let's walk through those categories. I'm going to guess. Obviously murder, Maybe robbery. Because what's the difference between a robbery and a burglary?
Well, burglaries are most likely in a home or a building where there's no one there.
Got it.
You know what I'm saying?
If there's a person present, it's a robbery.
Right. Or it would be it could be a home invasion, but but then they'll make it a robbery because usually a robbery is consistent of someone who steals property and uses a force or threat of force.
Mm-hmm.
So like if you wake up and you find someone in your living room, obviously, they're not going to just leave if you ask them to. There's going to be some kind of confrontation. So then it'll become a robbery. They would probably charge them with both, but only one would stick probably. Mm-hmm. Well, and now in New York, no one goes to jail. So unless you're a former president.
Well, that's a whole other subject for sure. So when you're talking about the major crimes, so we got robbery, we got murder, rape, assault, probably are the major ones. Other than that, what are you dealing with? Domestic disputes, drunken disorderlies, things like that?
Yep. Domestic disputes and emotionally disturbed persons.
EDPs.
Right. Those were the biggest where I worked. And, just disputes. Just people fighting over parking spots or in a store or just nonsense, fights. So in that sense, I didn't really have it that bad. Because obviously, if you work where it's busy, it's completely different. Now you're dealing with robberies and shootings and stabbings and, real high-end stuff, and sometimes it just doesn't stop, especially in the summer. The summers are always the worst because it gets hot. People are miserable.
Get agitated.
Yep.
So do many cops seek those precincts out, or do many cops avoid those precincts where the crime rates might be higher?
I think it's kind of 50-50. I think there are a lot of guys who want that action all the time. And personally, I feel those are the ones that get in trouble all the time. And then there's guys like me who just want to just go to work and go home and not get myself in trouble. Just treat it like a job, not like it's my life.
Yeah.
But one of the other things too that we're constantly dealing with was car accidents. I mean, car accidents were just nonstop. All the time.
Especially in New York with small streets, people parked on the sides, people trying to cut people off, red lights.
Yeah. And a side note now is that cops in New York now will not respond to a car accident unless there's an injury.
Wow.
So if there's a car accident and there's no injury, cops don't show up.
Exchange your information, you're on your own.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Too busy? Not enough resources?
Not enough resources.
Yeah. So let's go to your first major crime call. This is a long time ago. I know I'm asking you to search your memory banks here.
The first major crime call was probably the most exciting for me because other than walking this, when I was in Crown Heights, we would see stuff, but it was different because there was just so many of us. But probably the first real crime call was when I worked back in Bensonhurst I'm not sure if I was already in Crown Heights or if I came back or if I was being shuffled back and forth. There was a mob war in Bensonhurst. There was like a big mob war going on.
Wow.
And I'll never forget, I worked with this guy. He had like 13 years on the job. And we got a call of a shooting. And most of the time when you get a call of a shooting, it's nonsense, right? It's just someone calling, there's no caller ID back then. So it was just someone that wanted to see 10 cop cars on the street.
Wild.
But we always ask for a callback, to make sure it's legit. And I was not driving. I wasn't allowed to drive because I was only a rookie. So I get on the radio and I ask.
So you're in the car with the 13-year vet.
Right. So I'm the recorder or the passenger, and the driver drives. The passenger takes care of the radio. And the paperwork.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
So you're starting to figure out your paperwork now.
So I asked for a call back, and she says, yeah, we have 4 or 5 calls on this. So now you know it's legit. So now I'm like all excited, right? I'm going to see someone shot, right? And he's like, calm down. The guy's like telling me to calm down. I'm like, no, whatever. I'm just like telling him to drive faster, and he's just telling me to shut up. And we weren't that far away. We had to be maybe 3, 4 blocks away. And I'll never forget, it was winter. So it was before Christmas, and the guy was hanging up his Christmas decorations outside his house. They walked up behind him, shot him in the back of the head, walked away.
Wow. Straight mafia
4
style.
o'clock in the afternoon. 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Wow.
So I pull up, and First thing I see is him lying on the ground, and the steam is coming out of the back of his head from his brain. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is amazing. So, because it's like, the stuff you see on TV, right?
Sure. And now you're seeing it in real life as part of your job.
Yeah.
At 4:00 in the afternoon.
So, I quickly got shuffled to do like crowd control because, I was just a rookie and I was stupid. But probably the funniest thing about this story was that it made the news, and they put me in front of the house, blocking off traffic or reporters or just people that wanted to see with the crime scene tape. So the reporter standing right in front of me, doing her live report from the house or whatever. I don't even think it was live at that point. Like they just waited until like the 11 o'clock news or whatever. And I'll never forget, I got home and I was still living with my mom, and my mom is screaming at me saying that she saw me on the news chewing gum with the biggest smile on my face from a guy that got his head blown off.
Like, well, I became a cop, right? So when you're going through the academy, do they teach you about death, how to manage it, how to handle it? Because it's part of the gig, right? You see dead bodies. You see
not
murders.
Really. I don't remember them ever doing that. I mean, you go to the morgue, and actually we never made it to the morgue because they had some kind of fire or something that killed like 8 people.
Wow.
In Manhattan. So we never made it to the morgue, and we just never went back because it wasn't that important for them to send us. But no, I don't ever remember them dealing. I mean, listen, like 1991 was a lot different the way it is now. Like people didn't care about people's emotions back then. They were just like, deal with it.
How did you deal with it? Did you have any afterthoughts? Because, there's obviously the logic part. Hey, I'm a cop. I'm going to see certain things. But when you actually see them, it's a little bit different than imagining it.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of prepare yourself for it. But I worked with this guy. His name was Chris Cranston. He was one of the best cops I ever worked with. Big guy, out of shape, probably had like 24 years on the job at that point. And I remember I was working with him one day, and he said to me, he goes, the most important thing you have to do with this job is do not take it home. Just don't take it home. You have to leave it here. Because if you take that home every day, you're going to drive yourself crazy. The things that you see, the things that you hear, you just have to keep it home. And I don't even know how long I had, 6 months maybe. And I heard this from him, and I always had it in the back of my head. Like I never took it home. And it's probably the best advice you can try to give. And it's hard. I mean, like you see things that you see, it's hard to not bring it home and talk about it. But I did the best I could. Like my parents to this day don't even know half of the things that I've seen because I just never talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the way you have to be. I mean, I don't know if you talk about it at work enough, right? With the guys that you're there, that I don't see why you should bring it home. Because basically all you're going to do is just make people more nervous who don't know what you go through every day.
Yeah.
And I kind of was really good at that. Even after 9/11, I kind of was good at. I had some breakdowns a little while, for years afterward, but again, it wasn't as bad as it could have been, I guess, because at that point I was 10 years working and things that I've seen in 10 years, and I just knew that I just couldn't live in that 24 hours a day.
Well, and you brought up a number as we were getting ready to have this conversation that I had actually forgotten about, but I read somewhere that the average police officer has about 200 traumatic experiences. 200. The average person, me, this Rob, not New York Rob as we call him, our retired cop here, I, on average, have 3.
And you're talking 20 years as a cop, not a whole lifetime. And a whole lifetime, people see maybe 3.
Great point.
Right.
So, yeah, you're talking 20 traumatic experiences a year if you're 20 years on the job. And if you did about half your career on the street, half not, now your 200 traumatic experiences mostly are in a 8-9 year window. So that's tough.
Right.
So did you know cops, you must have, who did take it home? And what were they like? What long-term impacts, mental health did they have?
Well, you always know those guys you work with, the ones that are just cops 24 hours a day because they're just nuts. Like I used to work with guys that the smallest jobs or the most meaningless jobs you'd go to, they'd be driving them doing 90 miles an hour, and they always had to be the first one there, and they always had to they always have to take charge, and they always have to be like constant, like 110%. And those are the guys you can tell they're going to crack, and sadly, I mean, basically what it boils down to is people that take that home all the time are alcoholics, wife abusers. I mean, we've seen plenty of them. I mean, obviously worse things, but thankfully not many. But basically, it just comes down to alcohol abuse, drug abuse. The ones that can't leave it at work.
Yeah, and that's the part that I think as a society we kind of ignore because we know cops are there. Most of us never need them, but know if we call 911, a police officer will come. And that's kind of the relationship we mostly have. So even though we have people go through this for the benefit of all of us, whatever city you live in, Phoenix in our case, New York as you're a cop up there, that's what to me is another reason why it's important to have this conversation, because 200 traumatic experiences to 3 is a whole lot different. So to the NYPD, if you wanted to get out of some of those, let's call them more dangerous precincts, was there a way to do it? Did the NYPD say, oh, yeah, you've been here for 3 years, 5 years, or did you as the officer have to seek it out?
Basically, if you're in a place that you need to get out of, the only way you're getting out is if you screw up really bad or just do something like Eric Adams did, the mayor of New York. Just claim everything is racist and call the whole system is racist towards black people, and you just go wherever you want. You make such a stink where the job just wants to make you happy and get rid of you, or you really screw up. Those are the only 2 times, basically, that you're going to go somewhere that you don't want to be because they don't care.
Is it different now in 2023 than it was in 91, 92?
I would say it probably is a little different. But back then when I was working, you were stuck somewhere. If you didn't like it, it was too bad.
Man. Whew. So yeah, I can imagine. You pull the short match. You're like, oh yeah, you're going to be in this precinct on
and
midnight shifts.
And sadly, like I said, you have to screw up, or you have to be a complete screw up. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're a guy that's working and is just burnt out, they don't care. They just keep wanting you back every shift.
Because you're a body.
Right. I mean, if you do something stupid and beat the hell out of someone just because you lost it, then yeah, you're going somewhere, but you're not going somewhere because you're not going to be happy about it. You might go to jail.
Yeah. And you think that knowing what we know now about mental health, before a police officer gets to that point, you might have some intervention measures. Like, hey, you know what? We need to switch your shift. We need to find you a different precinct. Maybe you go on a desk job for a little while. So is that something that you would advocate, having done a lot of time on patrol, on the beat? Do you think it would be advantageous to move people around so that they're not dealing in... Because I just think about it from a stress response system. If you're a police officer, in most of your shifts, what is a shift like? Is it 3 days?
5.
So it's 5 days. So you would do Monday through Friday or, whatever the version would be.
Yeah.
And so if you're in a stressful place and you had a stressful shift, you'd be stressed out probably for 6 of your 8 hours, 5 days a week. Eventually, that's not good for you, just from your body standpoint. So I didn't even know if it's even possible to be able to, like, okay, we're only going to have a cop be in a stressful environment for like 8 months, and then we're going to rotate them out somewhere else. And then we can rotate someone into that. Or do you lose a little bit of rapport that, say, a cop might have with a neighborhood?
I don't think that matters anymore at this point. I think that's a great idea. And, just thinking about seeing guys that are stressed out, they may give you a break. Like, they may keep you in the station house a couple of days here and there just to, so you're not out there trying to crack someone's skull open, but you're still staying there.
Yeah.
And before I got out on the job, before I got out of the academy, they used to have, we talked about this, they used to have a 9-squad chart. And their goal was to do exactly what you just said, was to have the cops have some kind of interaction with the community, but not always the same ones, right? So you'd have a group of guys working day shifts for 2 weeks. Then you'd have them work night shifts for 3 weeks. Then you'd have them come back and do 2 weeks of day shifts, and then you'd throw a graveyard shift at them somewhere in there.
Oh, man. So your sleep is jacked.
So they thought that that would be the way that you would ease up on some of these guys, right? Because the midnight shifts are not going to be so hard as the 4 to 12 shifts, or the day shifts might be better or whatever. So they thought that was a great idea. Let's get these guys, into all hours of working so they can, see, okay, so it's not so busy now, or I can rest, I don't have to go crazy for 4 straight hours. But of course, now your sleep is completely screwed up, right? Like half the time you probably don't even know what tours you're working, and that totally backfired on them. It did not do exactly what it wanted them. They thought it was going to be like, okay, these guys will ease up. Like, all right, 2 weeks you'll be going crazy, and then for 2 weeks, okay, you'll be and then for 1 week, you'd be like sleeping half the time.
Yeah,
Didn't
I
work.
get the theory. Makes sense theoretically.
Didn't work.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it probably made things worse.
So then you got to undo your damage, because that's the tough part about experimenting in real time with real people. And like, oh, that'll be fine. Because no one had ever done it before. So yeah, I could see that would be kind of a mess.
But the problem, and it just goes like it's with everything else, like in the world, right? So if you want to get out of a situation where, okay, you're going to make these guys work in a place for 8 hours, 8 months, and they'll go crazy, and now you shift them, send them someplace for 6 months, right? The people that go somewhere for 6 months that's nice are not going to want to go back.
True.
So what are you going to do then, right? You're not going to send someone back that they want to go back, and they'll pull strings, they'll do whatever, and
there's no cops in that.
It's good in theory, but it won't work.
Yeah, that is very interesting, because I do think that policing has changed so much, as you can attest to, which you and I will talk about more at length. But I do wonder, in this world of social media, and you can film anything you want, how much more, and this is something you can never measure, how much more hesitation does a police officer have in general to take action than they did 5, 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago?
Oh, yeah, you can't even compare. I thought about this when we had these conversations about doing this, and I don't want to go into it too much because I know you're going to want to touch on it later on, but I feel that since 1991, when I got hired, there have been 3 major shifts in policing, right? The first one would absolutely be the use of cell phones, cameras.
Mm-hmm.
The second one would be Obama. I think Obama put a target on every cop's back. Just the rhetoric that he used, being anti-police. And the third, by far, was George Floyd. George Floyd just completely changed policing 180 degrees. But we can talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that the imagery of it made it seem like this is happening in every neighborhood, in every corner of America, because it was so front and center. So no doubt, right? Combine it. We definitely, as a society, have shifted our relationship with the police from we used to like go cops to cops stink, So that being a cop now, I'm sure you still have cop friends.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure the morale of being a cop as an individual officer is 180 degrees different as well.
Oh yeah, I mean I don't know many more. I mean, I've been retired now for 11 plus years, so I don't know many that are still left, but the ones that are left, like they're counting every minute. Like they can't wait to leave.
I can imagine. It's just that's the whole other part of the mental health. It's not just the experiences, the 200 traumatic experiences. It's what people say about your profession. That combines with it too. So, I mean, there's no doubt that there's a big mental health aspect to being a police officer. So let's go back to this first major crime, the mob hit. So now you're there. You're still a rookie cop. You've now seen a murder scene. What are you thinking about being a cop now? So, okay, how long were you on the job before this happened? Well, when this happened,
This
the shooting.
happened before Christmas, so I was only on the streets for less than 2 months.
So you have had a riot already, and now a mob hit, and you're 2 months into being a cop. What's going through your mind now?
Well, it's sad to say, but it was fun
Yeah.
because, again, if you know anything about the mob, they don't do anything when the police is around. So
It's not like you were in the line of fire.
right, and that hit was just the beginning.
Oh.
So we had a few more. I think we had 4 or 5 more within like 6 months after that.
Oh, man. And did you go to all of them? Were you on patrol?
I was really annoyed. I missed 2. I was off for 2.
You wanted to get the stamp card for all of them.
But they found a guy in a sleeping bag in the back of a station wagon. I was there for that one.
Wow.
I was there for a guy this really big fat guy. I forgot his nickname, but it was something to do with a whale or something, like, these ridiculous nicknames that they have for each other. But they shot this guy like 5 times or 6 times, but because he was so fat, like it never hit like a major artery. So he basically like walked into the hospital. I was there for that one.
See, there's a good reason, I guess, sometimes to
I was
put on some extra pounds.
Yeah. I was there for one where they went after someone's wife, which was like unheard of at the time.
Wow.
They tried to hit someone's wife, and then that caused another whole round of craziness.
And this is all within, what, a year of the
years.
first hit? So,
A couple of years, yeah.
Interesting. So you stayed in Bensonhurst where the mob activity was for that period?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, they were shuffling us back and forth to Crown Heights. So, like, the Crown Heights would be, like, we were there for a few weeks, then they'd pull us back.
Got it.
Then we'd go back, say, for another couple of weeks or a couple of days when they needed bodies. But my primary precinct was still in Bensonhurst. Like, I was still assigned there as a permanent precinct, but they would always they would always send us to Crown Heights because they needed bodies.
Absolutely, where the resources go, right?
Right. So technically, I worked in the Bensonhurst precinct for 9 years before I left.
Okay, so 9 years. So all on the street?
Yeah.
Okay, so 9 years on the street is a lot.
I was there for 8 years, 7.5 years. Then I broke my ankle on the job, and then that's when I started doing stuff inside the station house because obviously I had a broken ankle and was recovering from that. So
how does that work? How did you break your ankle on the job?
I broke my ankle carrying up a guy in a wheelchair.
Carrying him up where?
Up a flight of stairs into his apartment.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
well, that was very nice of you.
Well, yeah, I was with my partner and I was working, and after I was doing days, but I switched my tour because I used to play roller hockey for the police department. Used to have a roller hockey league, so I played in that. The games would be during the day, so we'd have to work at night. So I was working a night shift. I was working with my friend that I played with, and we get a call of someone that needed, I don't remember what kind of call it was, but he had to get into his apartment. So he used to have like the muscle heads used to carry him down, and like the wife used to push him around the neighborhood just to get some air. It was a nice day. It was spring or whatever. But they had no one to bring him back into the house.
Oh, man.
And which I thought was weird, but whatever. So we originally were going to carry him alone without the wheelchair, but he was adamant he needed to go up in the wheelchair for whatever reason. I don't know why. So I had the bottom of the wheelchair. My partner had the top, and my foot got stuck on the step.
Ooh.
Between the step, the back of the front of my foot got stuck on the step, and the front and back foot got wedged, and like, those little guards that they would put on the steps so you don't slip on them?
Oh, yeah.
Metal guard.
Yeah.
So my heel got stuck on that, and I couldn't move, and my partner lost his grip of the wheelchair, and all the weight fell back on me, and I couldn't move my foot because it was stuck, and I just heard my ankle snap.
Ooh. That sounds painful.
Yeah.
Just the description of it.
Ankle snapped, and I was more concerned about dropping this guy down the flight of stairs because he would have died or whatever, been really hurt. Wife is screaming, neighbors are screaming, and then all of a sudden, 40 people come out to help the guy upstairs.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
And here I am with my broken ankle.
Well, and that's such a weird thing to call the cops for. Hey, can you carry this guy upstairs to his apartment? Oh, is that what we supposed to do? But I guess it is, right? Yep. Cops call, cops go. Cops get a call, cops go. So 7.5. So you break your ankle. You're 8 years in.
So I broke my ankle, and it wasn't healing as fast as they wanted it to. And when you get hurt on the job, if you're out for too long, and you're in the station house for too long, and I think it's 6 weeks. I think it used to be 6 weeks. I don't remember. 8 weeks. I don't remember. So you go, you get your cast, blah blah blah. You don't go back to work. When they finally determine you're able to go back to work, you have 6 weeks to get your act together and go back out on the street. If you don't, then they transfer you to some ungodly, terrible job like arrest processing down at the courthouse, where you're just dealing with criminals 24 hours a day, which is a terrible job. Nobody wants to do that. So that's why they force you out of the precinct that you're in if you're taking too long to go back out, because they don't want people just like...
You're a body. You're a resource. Mm-hmm.
So they were going to do that. They were going to transfer me out. But they had just started this new arrest processing initiative, and everything was going to be on computers. And nobody wanted to do it.
Brand new, right? Because
everyone was afraid of computers.
Late
right?
90s now?
Yeah, it was like 1998 or whatever it was. Nobody wanted to do it. No one wanted to touch it. So they said, well, either you do this or you're getting transferred to central booking. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to central booking.
I'm going to learn these computers.
So, yeah. So, and then like we got a fingerprint scanner. So basically, if you came in with an arrest, all you do is give me the perp and I do everything. I print the guy. I get the computer working, do everything on the computer. You have to do some paperwork you'll have to fill out, but I process most of it. Because again, they want your body out on the street.
Yeah.
So they would give me the perp, I'd take care of everything, you'd go back out on patrol. So I did that. And it was, of course, if you know anything about the NYPD, they don't invest anything in anything that's worth money. So everything's cheap, nothing worked. Fingerprint scanner didn't work half the time. Like the programs on the computer didn't work half the time, so it was just a disaster. But it was still better than going to central booking.
Yeah. It's like on the TV show, it's always the old grizzled detective who got shuffled into the paperwork section. Yeah. He has to pull out records of old cases, burnt out, like, yep, this is where they sent me.
Yep.
Yeah, I could see wanting to avoid that. So 8 years on the street. How many dead bodies do you think you saw? Can you even count? Do you even know?
I don't know.
Was it a regular occurrence?
No, it wasn't regular. I mean, I don't know. A couple of dozen, maybe. I don't know. Most of them were car accidents. I mean, the shootings, obviously, but shootings are such a big thing that by the time you get there, there's always a million cops that are there. So you just like, you don't even bother at this point. Suicides, obviously. I don't know. I never even thought about that question. Actually. I would say a few dozen.
So there was a point from the very beginning, you knew not to bring it home. So it was like you saw it and you kind of compartmentalized, like, this is just part of the gig, part of the job. Yeah, I see. That's funny because I try to put myself in that situation, Rob, and I'm like, I don't know how I deal with it, but I guess you figure it out if you have to. If you see it, okay, part of the job.
And it's sad too. It's just like you have to just try to not. I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but they're people, right? But you can't look at people like, oh, this is someone's uncle. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is Uncle George who just got run over by a car. Like, you can't think like that because you drive yourself crazy. So it's just a guy. And I guess it's cold-hearted to talk like that, but you have to, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You can't look at everyone that you come across as, the great uncle who gave away like thousands of dollars of gifts for Christmas. I mean, you can't do that, or else you just drive yourself insane.
Well, and you're taking it home. The story that goes with that, the emotion that gets attached to that, and you think about it. And
it's tough. Like, it's tough not to be so emotional, but I think that's what you have to do.
I think, I agree.
And fortunately, it was so ingrained in me that I've heard that so many times since I've been retired that I have no emotion. I mean, you know me better than anyone with the people I've dated and the women I've been married to. Like, they come up with these ridiculous scenarios, and you show no emotion. I'm like, yeah. Because it's stupid. Because it means nothing in the grand scheme of life, right? And it's just the way it is, right? And it's sad.
Well, and it is, and I think that's another part about this too, is that going through on average those 200 traumatic experience to bring that up, you're going to handle things differently than I am. Like if I saw a mob hit down the street as I was going to work one day and I saw the guy's head steaming, I'd probably be like, whoa, oh, I'll never for that. Like I've seen car accidents too. I was driving to work one day and I used to work early morning, so it was like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. And it was on one of the freeways here in Phoenix. And there was just a woman lying in the freeway. I mean, obviously she was dead because the cops were all there and they weren't like trying to resuscitate her. Another guy I saw on another highway here was being like, they were doing chest compressions. So, driving by and I could still see both of them, like as clear as day. So it's not like I took it home, but it's just for me, not having had that experience, those are my go-to experiences. So seeing it and standing around and being a part of it as maybe not your everyday life, but a couple of dozen times on 8-9 years on the street is a lot. So you're every quarter seeing something like this.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, at least.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, accidents are the worst. Like I'll never forget. I had an accident. These two kids were on a motorcycle driving like idiots, no helmet, lost control, went underneath the car that was moving, ran them over, and fire department shows up. Right, so my love for the fire department. The NYPD and the fire department of New York do not get along at all, and it's basically
it's like Yankees, Red Sox.
It's basically jealousy on our part.
On your part?
Yeah, because they live the life of college students.
Well, especially now because there's so little house fires.
Right. And we live we go to work every day. They don't go to work every day. Like they work for 3 days straight in the firehouse, and they don't have to go to work for like 21 days.
Dang.
Anyway, so it's all jealousy.
Of course.
So we don't.
At least finally a cop is honest about it.
So this one job, these kids driving around, and we get the call, and underneath the car might be breathing, whatever. We get like 17 911 calls, so we're like, ugh, we know it's legit. So we pull up before the fire department, and I can literally see this skull coming out of this guy's forehead.
Oof.
His skull was crushed. The fire department shows up, and they have to play with all their damn toys, right? And they want to get the jaws of life, or whatever the thing is called, the hydraulic press, to get the car off this guy. And I'm like, I'm not a doctor, but you see that white thing that's sticking out of his forehead? That's part of his skull. His skull is crushed. And they're like, no, we got to do it. They prop this thing up. They pull him out, put him in the bus or the ambulance, and they need someone to pump oxygen into his mouth in the ambulance. So I get volunteered to do this. Same guy.
Wow.
Here I am I'm squeezing the bag of oxygen into this lifeless body, and he's just bleeding all over my shoes.
Oh, man.
Because he's dead.
Yeah.
His skull was crushed.
Yeah.
And I can just remember, I remember driving in the ambulance to the hospital and looking at this guy, and it almost wasn't like a human being. It was almost like it was a prop from a movie. And that's, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, you have to have some non-emotion sometimes, because it would drive you absolutely insane if you just let everything get to you like that.
Well, and I think there's a kind of a misconception, I think, about not having an emotion. It's not necessarily that I don't have an emotion. It's just I don't outwardly project that emotion all the time. Because, one of the things that the ancient Stoics taught was you're only in control of you. So you're going to have emotions sometimes. It's just what you do with those emotions, what you do with your actions, what you say.
Right.
So however you got to process that, if it works for you, especially the fact that you're on the front lines of it, it's easy for me to judge you and say, well, what's up with that? But I've never seen that. I hope I never do see that. My brother was a paramedic for, I think, only about a year, because it pays like minimum wage. It's kind of wild. But some of the stories that he saw in a year, it's the same as you, Rob. It's you have to have some level, I don't know if detachment's the right word, but you have to have a way to be able to go to work, because if that really bothers you, you're probably in the wrong line of work. So in order to have cops and EMTs, and sometimes firefighters, you have to be able to have people that can say, okay, I either turn it off right now, or I don't necessarily look at this person as a human being anymore because they're dead.
Right.
It's kind of like when you go to a wake, right? It's, you know that that's a body, but there's no one in it. But
Right.
you have to do it on the fly, on the job at 22 years old after a mob hit. A little bit different. Did you ever feel at any point during your career that your life was in danger while you were on the job?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
What was the worst case of that?
Well, you know, the infamous West Indian Day Parade things. For people that don't know, Labor Day weekend in Brooklyn, New York, they have a parade. It's a West Indian parade. So all the countries from the West Indies, Trinidad, Tobago, Jamaica, blah, blah, blah. They have used to have these floats, really nice floats with dancers, and it'd be a street, you know, it'd be long. It'd be like a mile long. So you'd have them go down, you know, they'd all be like a parade, like any other parade. And slowly but surely, it turned into not only costumes, but huge 18-wheel rigs where they would play reggae music. And that was supposedly a float. And it wasn't just on Monday. Now it became Sunday into Monday. Then it became Saturday into Sunday into Monday. Then they started this new thing called Juve, which is a West Indian holiday. And that would start on Friday and last until Monday. So you have any culture, no matter what race, where you're from, you start drinking and doing drugs on Friday. By Monday, it is not the nicest place to be.
And, you know, and that's to Rob's point. I used to live in New Orleans. Rob would come visit me in New Orleans. New Orleans, Mardi Gras, and New Orleans likes to celebrate. So, yes, by that third or fourth day of celebration, it always usually ended in some type of violence.
Right.
Unfortunately. So, same thing here, right? Nerves get frayed, people staying up too late, partying too much, not making the best decisions they've made in their lives. And you're there in uniform because every year was consistent, right? At the end of it, every year, year after year, there would be murders.
Every year. Yeah. I worked one year, and this is not the scariest part. I was working in a command truck. So I was off the street, I was in the parade route, but I'd be in a truck, command truck, and we were the ones who would tell the cops where to go, which corners to be on, whatever. One of my friends came to visit me during the parade. It's so loud. There's so many people. I'm talking to him, and people just start running. And I'm talking maybe 50 feet from us. Some guy got shot in the back of the head in a crowd of people 50 feet from me, and I heard nothing.
Wow.
Because it's so loud. There's so many people. And all you saw was people run and a body on the ground. 50 feet. And there's literally like 2,000 cops that go to this thing every year.
That's pretty brazen.
Yeah. So the scariest point for me was one year I was working on a scooter, like one of these little Riva scooters, like, you know, you see in Italy or France somewhere. And I worked with this guy who's a chief now. He's a big chief in the NYPD. And we had the freedom to do anything we wanted. Like, we didn't have to be there because we only need to be there if someone called us for whatever reason. We were mobile. We could have went anywhere. This fool wanted to be right in the middle of it. So I was with him the whole day. And we're on the street. And if you know anything about being in a bad place, when people start running, something bad's going to happen. So people just started running like crazy, and we heard like 4 shots. And we were trying to get through the crowd of people that were trying to get out of it. And I was on this little scooter, and I had probably 4 or 5 people try to grab my gun out of my holster.
Wow.
While I was on it. And I couldn't, it was wall-to-wall people. I really thought that someone was going to take my gun, and I was not shoot me, but take my gun and shoot someone else, right? I was terrified. Yeah, and then another time I was working with this guy in Bensonhurst, and some cracked up woman was shooting at us.
Wow.
From in a hallway. So, yeah, that was pretty scary too, but those are the two that stick out.
Still, that's too... I don't know if your body's going to react like this is a near-death experience. That's two more than I got choked when I was 14. That's the closest I've been, but certainly not as a, oh, there's a bullet whizzing by my face. What were you thinking when the woman was shooting at you? What were you doing? Did your training take over?
Well, see, thankfully, the way that we were situated was we had a lot of cover. So I was more worried about a ricochet more than anything else because we had cover. So she shot at us twice. So I wasn't really worried about getting hit directly because we were out of her sight. I was just worried about getting hit with a ricochet. Mm-hmm. And thankfully, one of the neighbors kind of distracted her for a second because it was an apartment building and we were in the hallway. So one of the neighbors distracted her just for a split second, and I just bum rushed her and tackled her.
Wow.
Yeah. And then she dropped the gun. So
did you think, or did you just react as soon as you had that opening?
Yeah, like, as soon as I saw that she wasn't looking at
Taylor
us,
in this bad boy right here.
As soon as I saw she wasn't looking at us, I took off. You know, because she wasn't very athletic. put it that way.
What do they teach you in the academy about threats to you? How to defend yourself? What are the rules?
Well, it's just everything's escalation, right? So they want you to use the least amount of force as necessary, right? So the first level would be, physical force, right? Use your fists, use your hands, try to get someone off you. If they keep coming at you, they want you to use the mace, right? Mace is the second one. If that doesn't work, you bust out the baton.
Oh, the nightstick.
Yeah, bust out the nightstick. And then obviously if there's weapons involved where you're going to, possibly get injured or killed, then you have to shoot someone,
Which you never had to do.
Thankfully, no.
Yes. That's a whole nother nightmare and paperwork.
I almost shot a kid who had a toy gun, but I couldn't tell it was a toy gun. It was a 12-year-old kid and dark. We got a call, he had a gun, and he was just stupid, wasn't listening to directions. And I had cover. If I didn't have cover, I might have shot him because he pointed the gun at us. But I had cover, so I didn't.
That's fascinating because what comes to mind is the Tamir Rice story. I think that was Cleveland. He was 12. He had a real firearm, if I remember correctly. Maybe it wasn't. But the cops reacted, and I don't think they had cover, and they ended up shooting him. So, I mean, that's... Can you tell you could tell he was young? Could you tell anything?
Yeah, I mean, he was tall for his age. You can tell he was a teen. I didn't think he was 12.
But firearms,
I thought he was 16, maybe.
Yeah.
But we got a call of a gun, and I saw a gun. And, and that's one of the fascinating things that we've also spoke about a million times, was that the cops that are put in these situations where they kill someone who maybe was innocent or didn't have a weapon, the cops just don't show up for no reason.
True.
Someone calls 911. Someone calls 911 and says someone has a gun or someone has a weapon. So these cops go to these things already thinking that someone has a gun that they're going to use against them. So their elevation, they're already elevated because they already think that they might have to protect themselves.
Was that you? So you get this call.
Yeah.
Gun. How many times did you get a call like that? I mean, I'm not asking for an exact number.
A lot. A lot of times it's nonsense because people just want the cops to show up. Like it's a bunch of kids on a corner that refuse to leave. So someone just makes an anonymous call. Yeah, I think one of them has a gun.
Got it.
You know what I'm saying? So then the cops show up. Obviously, because if I hear we get a call that a bunch of kids are on the corner, we don't care. We get a call that someone has a gun, then obviously people are going to show up.
And that's interesting because it sets you up for an expectation. So the first probably 5 times you do it, there's one firearm. You're like, huh. So as you get these calls, how do you anticipate if it's going to be real? I imagine you have to treat every call with a firearm as a real threat.
Yeah, I mean, basically any call you go to, you have to treat like it's some kind of dangerous situation, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously if it's a gun call, you're going to go with the expectation that, yeah, I'm going to make sure I'm not going to get hurt or no one else is going to
Absolutely. And that's what I teach you at the academy, right? The idea is that when your life is threat, you end the threat to you.
Right.
So when you're there with this 12-year-old, how did you not take that action? How did you talk it down? What ended up happening?
Well, one of the things that I always learned that I always did was we never pulled up right to the scene, obviously. So if you have someone with a gun and you're just pulling up right in front of them, you're a target. So I don't know who I was working with at the time, but we pulled up it was in a schoolyard. So we pulled up alongside of the school and we got out where we were able to see them, but they couldn't see us. So we were able to assess what kind of cover we could get before we got there. So obviously when we got there, we had cover already, and we would shout directions at them, and he just wasn't listening. I don't know why. I never found out why. I don't know if he was high or whatever, but yeah, we were always taught, or I was always taught, and I always acted in a way where I was putting myself in cover before I did anything. Unfortunately, sometimes you do just bum rush things and run out there, but
like the woman who was shooting at you.
No, I mean before you get there.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Like you get out, it's an active scene. There's lots of things.
Right. You don't think, especially if you see something going down in front of you, your first reaction is to run towards it, right, and not think about safety. And I'm sure I've did that 100 times too, but. Your first, you have to try to think safety before you get involved. I mean, especially if in a situation like that where there was plenty of ways for me to not rush in, you know what I mean? And assess what I had before I got there.
Well, let's see again. This is where actually having emotional control or turning off your emotions, whatever it is that the process is actually very helpful. Because if you reacted emotionally, if you were like, "Oh my goodness, I'm so scared, I have to handle this," that's when you're not necessarily using your rational part of your brain. So it's hard to do in the middle of a scene like that. And I think that is what a lot of us, civilians don't understand, because we're not trained in that. We're not in those situations. So we don't know how our bodies are going to react to someone waving a potential firearm around. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you're able to stay calm and say, okay, let's assess the situation first, might directly relate to not reacting to the dead bodies that you saw. So it seems to me, Rob, that that's a skill you were able to use in one of the toughest situations. I imagine that was one of the toughest situations you were in as a cop.
Yeah. Yeah, and it could be anything. I mean, I always think about all the situations that I was probably in where someone had a weapon and I never knew about it. Like, how many times do you think I pulled over a car where someone had a gun in the car? And it's because I didn't escalate anything. It was why I never got hurt, or no one else got hurt. Because, again, it's just how you're trained and how you react.
So let's shift gears here, because we're going through the tough parts of being a cop. Let's spend some time on the good parts of being a cop. So we talked about camaraderie, brotherhood, mostly male cops, I imagine, but there's a lot of female cops in the NYPD. So you guys have a camaraderie. Is that the highlight of the job? And what is a typical precinct like as far as relationships go? So there's so many questions here about how the structure works, how the camaraderie works, how cop humor works. So let's start with, give me an overlay of how a precinct is set up.
Okay, so the precinct's broken up into 3 different tours, right? So you have your midnight shift that ends at 8. Day shift comes in. They start at 8:30. And then at 3 p.m., the night crew comes in, the afternoon to night crew. So there's always that changeover. So you're always seeing guys. You're always seeing the changeover. When I worked in Bensonhurst, there wasn't many cops there. We maybe had 160 cops. When I ended up getting transferred to a busier place, now you're talking 400 or 500 cops that work there. The busier places the cops seem to be a lot closer, because you're getting involved with a lot more tension, a lot more crazier situations out in the street.
A lot more sharing of what people have seen, I imagine.
Yeah.
Story swapping.
So, yeah, I think the busier places are where the cops are closer. When I worked in Bensonhurst, it was very cliquey.
Ah.
You had people that just were useless, that, just weren't, they just weren't there to do anything, basically, and they had their little cliques, and they didn't speak to this one, or they didn't speak to this guy. It's just people are people.
Like high school. Yeah, exactly.
People are people. But when you worked in the same squad, it goes back to being in the academy, right? So when you're in the same squad of 10 guys, 10 guys, you're together all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the same days off. You have, you see each other all the time. So obviously you get really close to those guys. And it involves a lot of drinking after work, a lot of golf outings.
But is that a release? So your squad buddies are like, hey, you know what? We're off tomorrow. Let's go have a couple drinks. Let's kind of de-stress. Let's go play some golf. That's that bonding. Did you think that we were like, when you were a cop, you're like, I need this bonding, or is it just kind of something you just naturally do?
I think it's natural. I mean, because there are guys, girls that work in a precinct that, they're just loners. They don't speak to a lot of people. There's always guys that never hung out with anyone. They just come to work, go home, never come out, never go out for a beer after work. But yeah, I think it's just natural that you just have that closeness and, get together when you're not working, go to a ball game, go to a hockey game, whatever, play golf. Because again, it's just being in a family.
Yeah.
And like, the oldest line in the world is you can pick your friends, you can't pick your family, right? So, and that's just the way it is. Like, I worked with my old partner Steve for 6 years, and I'll be friends with him till the day I die.
Mm-hmm.
Because we hung out constantly after work. Because we were just always together and got to know each other and joke around and laugh. And
what do you guys talk about in the patrol car? So 6 years with Steve, that's a long time. Sharing a 8-hour shift, 5 days a week.
What happened at the game? Complaining about our girlfriends. Didn't get any sleep the night before.
Did you have a routine? So did you drive sometimes? Steve drive sometimes? Was it nope?
When we first started working, we would switch on and off driving. I can't drive. Meaning that I can't drive a car because I see people doing stupid shit in front of me all the time, and it drives me crazy. I'd be pulling people over left and right because it would drive me nuts. So Steve would get so aggravated, and he hated doing paperwork. So we made a deal that he would do all the driving and I would do all the paperwork.
How did you work that deal out?
Because we were going to kill each other if we didn't.
So it was for the interest of being friends and being partners. This is the relationship and how it's going to work.
Plus, he sucked at paperwork, and every time he did paperwork, I always had to fix it.
Okay, so it was just saving everybody time.
Yeah. So that's the agreement we had. And he would, and we would still argue because people would still be blowing red lights in front of us, and I would tell him to pull over, and he wouldn't pull people over, and he wouldn't do it because he couldn't be bothered.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to do paperwork, and it was just a good marriage because we just, plus I did all the talking. Every single job I had to do the talking because he would just get fed up with people. A few times we had to wrestle around with people because he would just get people so hyped up and it would just get out of control. So
he was the wheelman. You basically were the interaction and the paperwork.
Yeah. So basically he was just a chauffeur and some muscle if we needed it.
What is it like driving in a car for 8 hours a day, going from call to call to call to call?
It's not fun.
I can't imagine it not being fun.
I'll give you any police car in late 90s, and every single police car has some kind of stupid pen that's been buried into the dashboard 1,000 times, or the seat cushions are ripped, or just boredom.
Yeah.
Just complete boredom, sitting in a car for so long.
Well, I can imagine if you got like that. Did you ever have a shift where you didn't have any calls?
No. Yeah, we had to work in this precinct in Brooklyn by the Brooklyn Bridge once because they had their Christmas party. So the whole place was emptied out. So when that happens, obviously they ship other cars in to do the work. And I remember I worked. I don't think we had a call the whole night.
Wow.
Yeah. It was so boring.
It must have been because you're sitting in a car. Did you drive around or would you just park and say, I'll just wait here?
I work with this guy, Chris, who unfortunately passed away of 9/11 related brain cancer.
Oof.
And I worked with him, and he was not the most active guy anyway, and he was fine. I was losing my mind. Like I'd have to get out of the car and walk around, and like, what can you do, right? It's just complete boredom. And he would talk about whatever, and I got to get out of this car. I got to do something, you know.
What makes a good cop, in your opinion?
It's tough to say because I guarantee that if people knew about me, they would say I was a bad cop.
And why do you think people would say that?
I never went out of my way to make arrests.
I think that makes you a fantastic cop to me.
I always gave my arrest to someone else. I couldn't be bothered.
I love this story. You started in 91, retired in 2011. When was your last arrest? What year?
1998, I think it was.
I think that's what you told me. 1998.
My
kind of cop.
My goal was to have less arrests than years on the job. I wanted to have less than 20 arrests in 20 years. And a lot of cops would say that's bad. Like I still see guys on Facebook, these guys that work midnights, these guys that went crazy working in Bensonhurst, making, all these arrests when it was nothing going on. They say that they were the real police. Like someone like me is not a real police officer.
Because you're not arresting people every day.
Yeah.
But people would get arrested. You would just say, hey, officer so-and-so.
Well, Steve. Steve would take all the arrests. So, like, whenever, because then they started performance evaluations, right? So I wouldn't have arrests, but I'm like, well, Steve's got 12.
Yeah. I'm in the car with him.
Right. So, I mean, we're still a team, right?
Yeah.
But then there was a point where that didn't matter, where one of us had to make an arrest every month or whatever. So, yeah, I think 1998 was my last arrest.
I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, because I was still in Bensonhurst in 1998, and then I left a year and a half later. And then after I left, I didn't have to make any arrests. Well, I was supposed to, but I just didn't do it anymore.
So how do you, not to get away with it, is there you mentioned you have to have an arrest per month. So you're responding to all these calls, variety of things, from robberies and shootings or gun calls to petty stuff to fights. How did you apply discretion when you knew, okay, Steve, we got to arrest this guy?
You mean like how do I avoid making arrests?
Well, what was your system like to determine whether or not, okay, we got to bring this person downtown, as they say?
Well, the best thing about domestic incidents, because with domestic incidents, there's a guideline. So if you go to a domestic job and there's something in the guideline that says someone has to be arrested, you have to arrest someone, right? And that's the way it was towards the end of the time that I was on the street. But at the beginning, it was full discretion. So my favorite line, which I used a million times, was either everyone goes to jail or no one goes to jail.
It's like Harvey Keitel in National Treasure. Somebody's got to go to jail.
Right. So, because basically in every domestic incident where there's some kind of fight, you don't have to physically hit someone to be guilty of a domestic incident.
Like if you throw a lamp, for example.
You can throw someone, or you can harass someone, or you can threaten someone. So if you want to work by the letter of the law, basically every domestic incident could have resulted in an arrest. It doesn't have to be an injury involved. It doesn't have to be some kind of physical strike.
So if the cops came out, someone has to go out with the cops.
Basically, if there's evidence, right?
Yeah.
So my famous thing was, either you're both going to jail or no one's going to jail.
See? That's the kind of cop we need right here. Rational, level-headed, seeks cover.
And basically, any arrest situation needs a complainant. You need someone that's making a complaint that someone needs to get arrested. So if you find someone that, if there's someone who's not really sure if they want someone arrested because, you know, back in the 90s, there were still plenty of liberals running around where they wanted no one arrested. Are you sure you want this guy to go to jail? Because you're going to have to appear in court. You have to be the complainant on this. You don't? Okay, we'll let him go.
But it is tricky because there's so many crimes. There's so many criminals. There's only so many resources that the court system has. There's only so many attorneys in the district attorney's office. So I get it. It's always this delicate balance of who do you go after and who do you not. So do you think you were a good cop?
I think I was. I wasn't active. Obviously, I did what my arrest record will prove that.
Yeah.
But I mean, all my bosses loved me because my partners and I worked hard to clear all those jobs in the queue, and we would go out there and I mean, all they care about is answering jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone loves arrest, right?
Sure.
Everyone loves arrest, but when you're working in a precinct, a busy precinct, and supervisors are out on the street, they want that queue cleaned up. So they want you answering jobs as fast as possible, just getting them taken care of and off the board.
So that's your sergeant that interacts with the squad. Is the sergeant the one that's like, hey, guys, we need these calls cleared?
Right. So then if there's a lieutenant out, so the sergeant will be in control. You have a sergeant for each squad. He'll be out there being listened, like whatever. And then there's a lieutenant that's also out there and that's out on the street. And then back at the station house, there's always someone listening to what's going on. So if things really get out of control, someone from inside the station house will get on the radio and like clear the queue or want to know. They used to call for a rundown. Rundown was a favorite thing because they would ask the dispatcher where everyone was and why no one is doing anything. So when you had someone from the precinct ask for a rundown, you knew something was. Yeah, someone's not doing.
Respond to a call now. Car number 102, whatever.
So yeah, I mean, I wasn't active as far as arrests, but if there was 6 jobs in the queue, Steve and I would pick up all 6. It would take us 2.5 hours to do it. But you know what? They didn't care. The queue was cleaned.
Yeah. Because, you would know, right? Okay, if there was a robbery over a car, a fender bender, you'd go to the robbery.
Well, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So they would gear you, and then you just go through, and all right, I got to go take a statement in some cases. Because I think that's a lot of what gets lost is that some of the stuff doesn't necessarily need to have an arrest. It just needs some type of official statement, official police activity to go on an insurance report.
Yeah, and the biggest word they use is discretion, right? I mean, obviously, if you're in an arrest situation and you have all the signs and everything falls into place where you have to make an arrest, you do, right? But there's plenty of times where you use your discretion, and most of that is with when you pull over a car stops. Mm-hmm. You don't have to give everyone a summons. You don't have to give everyone a ticket. Like this thing that happened a few months ago about this cop in Florida, or wherever it was. The chief, whatever she was, driving around in a golf cart, and she got pulled over by the cops, and she used her badge to get out of the ticket. She got forced to resign.
Right.
Which is absurd.
A bit much.
It's absurd. Because you don't have to give a ticket to anyone that you pull over. That's what discretion is.
Which is a great question. And your advice as a cop, retired now, what's the best way to get out of a ticket?
Be nice.
Be nice.
You just have to be nice. Follow orders and be nice.
Which explains, because I've been pulled over, I don't know, 6-7 times. I've only gotten one ticket because it was in Iowa. They tracked me by plane. Every time I was like, yeah, I was speeding. One time I went through a red light. It was, I was going to work. It was like 3:30 in the morning. This is way back I was like 22 or something. And I was like, yeah, I thought I made it. That was stupid. And they were like, all right, we're out here looking for drunk drivers. So I acknowledged my wrong. I was nice, and they were like, "Yeah, all right, go on to work." But like, seriously, that's dangerous. Don't do that again. I'm like, got it, because I always found that same thing. If you're just nice, you have your window down. I would always put my hands on the steering wheel, and I would say, "Okay, the registration's in the glove box. There's no firearm in there. Do you want me to get it?" Yeah, you can go ahead and get it. Whatever. I would just go through the step-by-step process every time, and it always worked.
Yep. Be nice, be respectful. Odds are you'll get out of the ticket.
See? Useful information. Be nice, be respectful. Should you admit what you did or not?
Not necessarily, because we already know what you did.
Well, I've heard some people say, well, you can't admit to a cop what you've done wrong. I'm like, every time I've done that, they said, okay, we're going to give you a warning this time.
I mean, if anything, if you're going to admit to something, you might just add it to something that you weren't pulled over for.
Yeah, I didn't use my directional signal either.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly.
Well, you want to know all the 5 things I did wrong? I'll just tell you. So you showed restraint, which I think is, I love this because a congressman that I know, Congressman David Schweikert, I've talked to you about numerous times. He's an Arizona representative. So I was in D.C., and he gave us a little tour of the Capitol. He points into this rotunda. There's all these paintings. And he points to a painting. And he says, you want to know why that's the most important painting in here? And he explains it's because that was when George Washington, after he became president the second term, at the end of it, he was like, nope, I'm done. I'm relinquishing the power. Because I think that is such an important distinction that just because you have power doesn't mean you should use it all the time. Because not everybody deserves to be arrested to go through the whole rigmarole, because it's expensive to get arrested. At the very least, it's time consuming for both the officer and the perp. So I tend to agree with you that I like cops that sort of have a good instinct for, yeah, this person needs to go to jail, this person doesn't. So I think I would agree with you. But what about a bad cop? What do you think as a retired police officer? What makes a bad cop, and what percentage of cops would you consider to be in that category?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, in my experience, I would say, I mean, bad, you can use bad different ways, right? Bad cops obviously are the ones that violate people's rights, just beat people for no reason, right? But then you have the ones that falsify information or, you know, make things worse than they actually should be because they're power hungry.
Sure.
Or, I don't know. I would say it's tough to say. 3-4% of cops are like that,
which is pretty low.
Yeah, I mean, listen,
That's probably the same in any profession.
We've had this discussion a million times. No cop, unless you're really out of your mind crazy, wakes up every morning and says, "I'm going to shoot a black person today." No one does that. No one, unless you're legitimately racist or insane.
Yeah.
It's just,
which there probably are,
right?
Cops
of course,
like that, but not many.
In every profession, you're going to have someone that shouldn't be doing it. Right?
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of bad cops out there, and most of them are narcissists, probably power hungry, ones that were bullied in school.
Yeah. That
now they have a uniform, they can think they can do whatever the hell they want.
Well, we knew a guy who retired out here who was an NYPD officer who was talked a big game, but if you challenged him, he didn't like that.
Yeah, I mean, I literally talked to one of these guys on Facebook, a guy that had a lot more time than me, worked together briefly, and he's still like a big muscle head. Like, he works out like crazy, and he hates cardio. We didn't know he hated cardio until I got into this conversation with him on Facebook and a couple other guys. And he was bragging about how people in the precinct and the precinct next to us were so frightened by him because he would kick their asses. And like, he was bragging like that he used to beat the shit out of people. And I commented on this Facebook thread that we were in, and I'm like, if you have to brag that you had people terrified of you because you used to beat the shit out of them and violate their rights, and you think that's honorable, there's something wrong with that. And there are plenty of guys like that. And I used to work with these guys, people like him. They work together. Big muscle heads, spend a lot of time in the gym, in the precinct, and any little thing, any little job that we would go to, they'd be beating the shit out of people because they can get away with it.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean,
especially if it is someone that is in a weaker position in society, someone maybe who's a little bit poor, maybe a drug addict. No one typically cares about what happens to them.
Yeah, and he's 60 years old now, and I'm like, and that's still his mentality, and it boggled my mind. And I got him so aggravated that he unfriended me. So.
Well, that's a good way to solve that problem.
Yeah.
Let's go in the opposite way. So you mentioned Chris Cranston as a good cop, like a good mentor. Tell me about some of the good cops. Tell me a little bit more about Chris or another cop that comes to mind that was helpful for you.
Well, it's funny because Chris's nickname was Detective McShitcan. So in the police department, if you shit can something, it's you basically just sweeping it under the rug. Like you can't be bothered. And Chris was the king at that. But he was also good when he needed to be. But there was a lot of times where he was Detective McShitcan.
But again, right, if he has the right discretion, where it's like, this doesn't need to be as big of a deal as it's going to be.
But my favorite story about Chris, by far, is we had a call, and it was in Bensonhurst, and some crazy guy was running around with a machete, and he was threatening people with this machete. So we got a whole bunch of calls on this. We pull up, we get out of the car. The guy doesn't come at us, but we see him he's waving the machete around. We get out of the car to confront him. He runs. So Chris was a big guy, not in the best of shape. I, like an idiot, go running after him. Guy takes off.
There's a pattern here. I don't know if you heard the pattern that Rob charges at the woman who shoots at him. This guy with a machete, Rob charges at him.
Well, he ran, so I chased after him. And I look back, and I don't see Chris behind me. I'm like, what the hell is he doing, right? I'm running. Chris blows by me with the car. I lose sight of the guy. Guy goes around the corner like he's in some kind of little park area. And I turn around the corner. The guy's on the ground. Machete goes flying, and his leg is in a 90-degree angle.
Ooh.
And I pull up. I run up, and the guy's like, he ran me over with the car. So I look at Chris, and he was like, what was I supposed to do? Get out? So I just ran him over with the car. Chris ran him over with the car. And his thinking, his thought process was, and this is what he said, if I got out of the car and confronted this guy and he charged at me with the machete, I would have shot him.
Yeah.
So instead I ran him over, and he's alive, but he has a broken leg. So who wins? And he's right.
Well, he had a machete. I mean, that is a weapon.
Yeah.
He could have caused you guys harm, anyone running down the street
and
harm.
Of course, he wasn't talking it like in the, in a smart sense. He was laughing about it like it was a joke. And he was totally right. He made a joke out of it. He's like, I was going to kill the guy. It's either I kill him or break his leg. So he got the best of it.
See, this is an honest look at what it's like being a police officer, this is why it's so great. Thank you, Rob.
But the funniest thing, well, not that.
It gets better.
Oh, it gets better because of where we were. Like, imagine now in the day.
Oh, my goodness.
If a cop ran over a guy
Cell phones
and
would be
broke his
out.
leg,
Mm-hmm.
there'd be a riot.
Yeah.
But because we worked in a nice place, we literally had to stop the neighbors from killing this guy.
Oh, wow.
We had to protect him.
Because they didn't want him.
While he was on the ground with a broken leg.
Wow.
Because he threatened so many people with this machete, they wanted to kill him.
Wow.
So they were actually happy that we ran him over, that Chris ran him over with the car.
No complaints were filed, and
nope.
Everybody has just said, yes, that was the right thing to do, because there was a madman on the loose with a machete.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. So anybody else? Was there any good, there's probably many. Any sergeants, lieutenants that were just instrumental in creating good precincts, good departments?
Yeah, my first training sergeant was like we said, he had like 300 years on the job.
Yeah.
He didn't last long. I think he retired, and we got this other guy, Patty Keene was his name. He was really good. Like he knew his stuff. Like he was very technical. He knew like the law. Like, and he would explain to us every day. He would have some kind of instruction before we went out. And, search and seizures or, unlawful searches. Mm-hmm. And every day he taught us something. He was a really good training sergeant. I learned a lot from him. And then once you get out on the street, it's not necessarily the same thing. Like now your bosses have to have your back, and your bosses need to support you. Mm-hmm. Where you might not be doing the right thing, but they're going to support you because you work for them.
And they're going to teach you what the right thing is.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of different. So when you're in the academy, it's different. When you're out of the academy training, it's different. And once you're on the job, it's different again. And I've had good bosses. There are some real terrible bosses.
Comes to the territory, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
again, just like any other job.
Yeah, if you get stuck with the now mayor Eric Adams when he was a cop, if he was your boss, probably wouldn't have been a great boss.
That guy's a disaster. Like, I don't know. There's probably not 99% of the job probably hates that guy.
Mm.
It's sad that the only people that like him are the people that probably worked for his organization, which was called 100 Black Police Officers.
That was the title of it?
100 Black Cops or something like that it was called. So you're only able to join if you were black.
Mm-hmm.
So they probably won't have anything bad to say about him. But cops themselves, no one likes him.
Interesting.
Yeah, because he wasn't a cop. He was a cop, but he exploited the job for his benefit.
And now he's the mayor.
Right.
Yeah, so that's interesting too, because the career path that I would love to do more of these if you're okay with that, because I have like 1,000 more questions. So what I would love to end on for now is, how would you define a hero when it comes to being a police officer, especially with the NYPD, the nation's largest police department?
Well, I think that term gets thrown around too much. And sadly, when cops get killed, they are heroes, which I don't really get sometimes. I mean, I get it. You know, you died in the line of duty. You sacrificed yourself for a job for people. But I don't know if that necessarily makes you a hero. It's sad, obviously.
Sure.
But I think what a hero is people that do their job every day and treat people with the respect of the people that you are paid to protect every day.
Which is really interesting, as you pointed out before, Rob, that when you had to deal with a deceased person, you knew that wasn't a person. But when you dealt with real people, you somehow always were able to remind yourself that this is a real person, maybe just going through something a little difficult right now, including the 12-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing just came to my mind. I only had a few years on the job, so I was still new. And whenever someone dies at home, where there's the need for the medical examiner has to show up to any incident of someone who dies, and most of them, 99% of them, are natural causes. So when this happens, you have to sit there and wait for the medical examiner to show up, and then they come and take the body. So they give that to a lot of rookies, obviously, because you're walking a foot post, and you're not
hanging around this house.
You're not essential to the daily activities of the precinct, right? So they get a rookie to sit there and wait for the medical examiner to show up. And I'll never forget. So I was working a night shift, and it started during the day. So the guy they had there during the day was a guy who had like 12 years on, let's say. I don't remember, 12, 14 years. And apparently he didn't talk to the family, didn't care, was like, doing a crossword puzzle.
Oh, yeah.
Or whatever, reading the paper, not paying any attention to the family. He left. I go in there. I was talking to the family, asked about the person. I asked to see the body because, sadly, we used to call them the ghouls from the coroner's office would come and take the body, and if there was anything of value on the body, it would get stolen.
Jeez.
Jewelry, rings, whatever. So I asked the family if I could see the body only because I explained only because I'm just worried that, they might steal something. So he had a couple of rings on, the guy. We took the rings off. They kept them in the house. And I spoke to the family. Medical examiner didn't show up for like 3-4 hours. And the next day, the father, or I forgot the son, whoever it was, came into the precinct. And he asked me if I was working the next day, and I told him. He came the next day when I was turning out after roll call and shook my hand and gave me a letter and gave the letter to the lieutenant. And just how great I was with the family. And it's like, it's just being a person.
Sure.
Just treating people like people,
Mm-hmm.
And I still have that letter somewhere. I don't know where it is, somewhere in my house. And it was just, that's the way I always felt like I should be, So
imagine that. Maybe that's not what you've heard from cops before. So what I'd love to do next time, Rob, is you were a cop in New York City the day 9/11 happened. And then you essentially volunteered to hang around Ground Zero for 6 weeks after that.
Yep.
So I'd love to go back to as you're getting off the street, you break your ankle, you start getting into crime stats. I would love to talk to you about that, 9/11. And I really would love to know more about overtime as a police officer and retirement. Because one of the great fascinating things about Mr. Rob Coppola right here is he hatched a master plan about 10 years before his retirement to be able to pull it off. And he was able to pull it off. And he's been retired since the age of 41. Pretty cool. But the final question I have for you today, what advice would you give yourself now in 2023 if you could talk to your 21-year-old, 22-year-old just becoming a police officer?
Ooh, I don't know. That's tough. I think what I would say is just take it all in and enjoy it. You know, enjoy the relationships that you have with the guys you work with, people you work with. Don't be so serious about going to work every day, and just, you know, be safe, but also enjoy it and enjoy the people that you meet friends with, lifelong friends. And I don't know, that's a tough question, because I kind of feel like that the way my career went is kind of the way I would do it now. You know, I don't think I don't really regret anything that I did while I was working. Like, I don't second guess things like, oh, I should have done this, my career would have been different. So I kind of think that the advice I'd give myself now would be to just enjoy the people that I worked with more than I did, because I think my career kind of went the way I wanted it to.
Rob, thanks so much for spending so much time with us. It has been an enlightening conversation, which is my goal here, because I think that when we ask each other questions, we get to learn a lot. We get to listen to those answers. And those answers broaden our perspectives. And I think that helps us be more considerate that there are people out there who disagree with us, who have a different way of life than we do. But it happens, and it's real. There are realities that are much different than ours. So maybe having conversations like this helps us seek out solutions about where we're different and why. Because I think that if we look at our media complex, they're not really talking solution-based ideas. It's the fight. It's the fear. It's the attraction to get people to watch and to click. That's fine. There's a role in that for our lives, but sometimes we want to dig a little bit deeper and get to know topics a little bit more intimately, if you will. Next week, we're going to have a conversation about how important your central nervous system is, because we all go through stresses every single day, good, bad, and they all impact us. And the central nervous system is so important in how you manage that if you think about health. Dr. Steve Ruby is a chiropractor based in Scottsdale, Arizona, who focuses on longevity. He studies it, he guides his clients through it, and he really has a in-depth knowledge about how your body handles. For example, if you're under financial stress, or if you're under job stress, or if you're working out. So these are some of the things that I think will be helpful for all of us to know, because at the end of the day, my doctor, my general practitioner, told me this. As doctors, most of what we do is guesswork. So the more knowledge you have about how your body works, the more personal freedom you have towards your health. That's what we're aiming for next week on Equal Matters with my man, Dr. Steve Ruby, a Scottsdale chiropractor. So make sure you subscribe, rate and review us. And if you like what we're doing here, sharing stories and fostering understanding and broadening our perspectives, tell a friend. Because the broader we grow, the more stories we can find and the crazier places that we can go together, as this will be Equal Matters, an immersive podcast based around knowledge, growth, freedom, and community. Once again, my name is Rob Hunter. This is Equal Matters. We'll see you next week.